Phrolova will finally be coming to Wuthering Waves, and being anticipated as she is, a lot of people are wondering if they should be pulling for Phrolova or not, so that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So here are Phrolova's biggest pros and cons. The first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Phrolova is that she's most likely going to be the best Havoc DPS in the entire game. The primary competition to this role is Camellia, but Havoc Rover is an additional very strong Havoc DPS, so Phrolova has quite the work cut out for her. But even so, it seems like to me Phrolova is going to end up having the highest damage output out of all of the Havoc characters. Elements are becoming more and more important within the metagame of Wuthering Waves. At first, they were just there for resistance checks on mobs, but now it's become more integral when it comes to buffs from tokens within Whimpering Wastes, as well as increasing or decreasing specific resistances for specific enemies within tower floors or within Whimpering Wastes. So which attribute your DPS is has become more and more important, and thus getting DPSs of different attributes is pretty valuable to your account at this point, and Phrolova will serve as the best option when it comes to Havoc. At this point, all of the DPSs from 2.0 have just been better than the 1.0 DPSs, and I suspect that Phrolova will be no different on her way to power creep Camellia as the best Havoc DPS in the entire game. Another high value point that Phrolova brings to the table is the fact that her damage output looks incredibly consistent, because unlike basically every other DPS in the game, Phrolova will be capable of dealing significant damage while off-field, and this is quite important for a game mode like Whimpering Wastes, where consistent damage output is key. Phrolova will be capable of doing a large amount of damage during her own field time, much like every other DPS in the game. But where Phrolova differs is the fact that she has a summoned entity that will be dealing damage while Phrolova is off the field. And while it's not going to be as high as when Phrolova is on the field, the fact it's there is still going to be very useful when it comes to killing waves of enemies. In game modes like Tower, and especially Whimpering Wastes, it's pretty awkward when an enemy is barely alive after your DPS has already finished their rotation. But Phrolova is never going to run into this issue due to her focus on a summoned entity, being the Hecate. Its ability to attack from off-field will make it so you're always going to be pushing out damage, which in a game mode like Whimpering Wastes means you're almost always going to be killing waves of enemies. This is the exact same thing that I praised the Monofusion team for, and Phrolova seems to be following in the footsteps of the Monofusion team by never letting go of the enemy, as well as running for the characters that do very significant damage, which I'll talk more about later. Another very positive quality that Phrolova has on her disposal is the fact that Hecate will be capable of grouping enemies. Hecate seems to have some abilities that will group enemies while they are either off-field or on-field, which is again very useful for a game like Whimpering Wastes. Enemies have a tendency to split up in that game mode, so you really want a strong grouper to make sure that they're always together. And with Phrolova seemingly being capable of grouping enemies even when she's not on the field, much like Rochia, enemies don't seem to ever get a chance to escape. Even in Tower, the ability to group enemies can be quite useful, not only on the lower stages of Tower, but also on the 4th stage of the left tower as well as the 2nd stage on the middle tower, because there's always going to be elite enemies there which you are capable of grouping. So Phrolova being able to group enemies, combined with her incredibly consistent damage output, means that she's going to be an absolute beast within the Whimpering Wastes game mode. And if that wasn't enough, another positive that Phrolova possesses is the ability to run multiple different teammates. Sure, the best in slot is going to be Cantarella and Rochia according to the livestream, but that doesn't mean it's her only option. Unlike Zani, Phrolova has very powerful FTP options that she will be capable of running if you do not have the premium team. Don Jin has an incredibly fast rotation, which also deals a decent amount of damage. And even if this is too short for a Phrolova rotation to fully work out, you can decide to go for a longer rotation on Don Jin, which has very high damage per rotation, meaning that no matter what, Don Jin is still going to be a good option for whatever scenario you find yourself in with Phrolova. While her Ultra skill may definitely be weaker than that of Cantarella, she also has the ability to use her S6 to buff Phrolova's attack. So ultimately, Don Jin is going to be a pretty competitive option when it comes to the sub DPS slot within the Phrolova team. Additionally, you also have the ability to just run a standard healer like Verino or Shorekeeper. And while it's not going to be as powerful, again, as just running the triple Havoc comp, it's still going to work completely fine due to Phrolova being capable of utilizing the attack percent buffs from Rejuvenating Glow as well as Shorekeeper's crit buffs. Additionally, due to Cantarella's more disappointing damage profile compared to other sub-DPS characters, losing out on Rochia's buffs for your Cantarella is not going to be nearly as impactful as losing out on Lupa's buffs for a Brand. So while Phrolova definitely does have her premium team, she is able to support herself much better without this premium team. But obviously not everything is sunshine and rainbows. Because speaking of the premium team, if you want to go for the best Phrolova team, it's going to be pretty expensive. Much like Lupa teams, you don't just have one DPS character and a sub-DPS who does okay damage. No, every single one of your teammates has a relevant damage output as well as energy requirements, meaning you have to fully build 3 characters for one team. This is a lot more rough than just building one hypercarry team, where you need to fully invest in one DPS character, give some attention to the sub-DPS, and you can basically neglect the healer. Additionally, because you have 3 characters in your team doing relevant damage output, getting all of their weapons is going to be a pretty good increase in terms of team damage. So ultimately, getting Phrolova's absolute best in slot team is not only going to cost you money, it's also going to cost you your time, and some people just aren't willing to commit to that. Another flaw that Phrolova might be subject to is the fact that she is our very first character who uses a summoned entity. This is not like a coordinated attack. This is its own entity that has to do its own attacks. And if you've ever played other games, for example Genshin Impact, you can know that these summons can be pretty finicky and inconsistent. A big example of this is Furina. Furina's pets sometimes just have a mind of their own and decide not to attack the enemy, which can really mess with your rotations. Phrolova can end up being pretty similar if her summon is not coded correctly. If the AI doesn't do what you want it to, you kinda just have to live with that fact. There's not really anything you can do about it. And this may end up causing your Whimpering Waste or Tower of Adversity runs to be less consistent than if you were to run a different character. For example, while I was praising Phrolova's potential to be good within Whimpering Wastes, the fact that Hecate could just simply not see the fact that there are enemies half the time could greatly lower Phrolova's ultimate performance within the game mode. And if this ever ends up being the case, it could be a very big issue for anyone who really wants to use Phrolova wherever possible. The fact that Hecate could just completely refuse what you want it to do is a way bigger issue than I feel like most people are going to realize. Obviously, this is something that we really can't judge until Phrolova is in the game, but the fact that it's a potential issue still means I have to talk about it. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that Phrolova's first rotation is most likely going to be much weaker than that of other characters. Now, usually this isn't an issue for characters to face. Sure, your support might not get their intro skill immediately, but that's fine. But for Phrolova, it's a way bigger deal than usually. Phrolova has to summon Hecate in order to fully utilize her kit. Hecate is not only the source of Phrolova's forte, it's also most likely going to be a very large part of Phrolova's damage output. So if you do not have Hecate, Phrolova is losing out on damage. And considering the fact that you need to use her Resonance Liberation to summon Hecate, this can end up being quite an issue for Phrolova's first rotation. Additionally, because you're running a comp that consists of Rochia, Cantarella, and Phrolova, you are kind of going to suffer if no one has their intro skill. This would be the case within Tower of Adversity or the second half of Whimpering Wastes. All 3 of these characters rely on their intro skills in order to be able to fully utilize their rotation. So the fact that no one in the team has access to their intro skill right away, as well as the fact that Hecate will not be present for your first rotation, means that Phrolova is going to be a very hard snowball unit. She's going to look underwhelming initially, but after you finish your first rotation and summon Hecate, your damage is going to dramatically improve. So if there's any sort of game mode where the fights don't last a long time, for example the Tower of Adversity, you might end up just clearing slower than other characters, purely because of the fact that Hecate is not there for half the fight. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think of Phrolova down in the comments below, and let me know if you're pulling for her. If you're down there already, might as well like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. Additionally, if you just want to see more of me as a person, you can check out my second channel down below as well. I mainly post punishing Grey Raven, but I honestly am just gonna post whatever I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.